Welcome back to College Football Addiction, a big-time report for those that are interested in conference realignment dropped today. Not incredibly surprising, nothing absolutely groundbreaking, something maybe we all expected, but it is an important piece in the fight for both Florida State and Clemson, and then others that haven't technically filed lawsuits, but teams trying to get out of the ACC. Let's jump right into it. ESPN and ACC agreement that we've talked about with Doug Rohan over on Double Fries No Slaw, that we've talked about from several different aspects. Both Ross Dellinger of Yahoo Sports and David Hale tweeted that it is expected that that media deal extension is agreed upon. It is ratified. The ACC is going to agree to what ESPN proposes. We haven't seen any numbers. We haven't seen any details. My anticipation would be that just the date is extended. I don't expect money to change drastically. If it does, we'll certainly update. We'll certainly come back with that. But maybe the linchpin of this, maybe the most crucial part is what this now means for Florida State and Clemson. Are they now stuck in the ACC until 2036? Is that date maybe sooner? Let's talk about it. We will chat with Doug Rohan from a legal perspective about this later over on Double Fries No Slaw. If you're watching this and you've seen any of our realignment coverage, make sure that you're subscribed, not only here, but that you go check us out over there as well. What folks weren't quite sure on with this is whether or not the powers that be at ESPN would possibly move around assets to the SEC, to other locations through this renegotiation. And it doesn't appear as of now that that's going to happen. It does look like this deal will be agreed upon and that the ACC will be carried on ESPN until 2036. Does that mean that Florida State and Clemson are in the ACC, and UNC and Miami and the other programs that we would anticipate have a landing spot in other locations? Does it mean that they're locked in for the next decade plus? Or is there a chance that they could get out earlier still? David Hale of ESPN slid this into the last paragraph of his ESPN article. It was not in the article when originally published. I don't know if that was an oversight. I don't know if that was intentional. Obviously, an article is going to get the most traffic when you first publish it. Not accusing David Hale of anything. I just find it interesting that this was added later, but he did put this in the end of his article. I believe that David Hale's sources are from Charlotte. I believe that they are within the ACC. I believe the same for Ross Dellinger, not that he doesn't have contacts within athletic departments. I know he does. I know who some of his contacts are. I believe that the way that this is written, those guys are reporting from the ACC's perspective. That's important, and we'll talk about why in just a moment. But Hale did update his article to include the following. Ross had pointed this out on a Twitter Spaces yesterday as well. Hale said, as part of the settlement, Clemson and Florida State are asking the ACC to agree to reduce the penalties for exiting the grant of rights after 2031, when TV contracts for the Big Ten, SEC, and Big 12 are set to expire. Now, again, I've had David Hale on my show multiple times. He's always been very gracious to me. I'm not telling you that he's doing anything malicious. Again, I do think he's speaking for the ACC. Look where he works. Look at the conference he covers. I do think that he's coming at this from a perspective of trying to make the ACC look as good as possible. In fact, he even tweeted this. He said, this is really good work, or pretty good work, by Jim Phillips to ensure that it all came together. Patting Jim Phillips on the back after the last couple of years is maybe a little funny, but again, that's David Hale's perspective. He said it probably doesn't guarantee that there won't be more issues eventually, but that's life in college football these days. If a revenue deal gets done, which I'm told is likely, the ACC should be in a stable place for the next 5 to 6 years with a model that can keep the biggest brands contending. We may have some disagreements on the biggest brands contending, but we will see. The big part of this that you need to take away is what's proposed is that the ACC is going to bend and give Florida State and Clemson an apparent win by adjusting the revenue. something that we need to talk about more fully. I've got some graphics to show you on the screen. But in theory, the idea would be that what Florida State originally asked for back in early 2023, Michael Alford was saying that we needed this and the ACC would not bend on it. Michael Alford was saying that we needed unequal revenue sharing and that Florida State brought in 15% of the viewers to this conference and was getting paid less than half. They were getting 7% of a media payout. And Alford was saying for us to continue to bring you that many eyeballs, for us to continue to be relevant nationally, we need you to pay us more. The ACC for 2 years now has said, no, we will not do that. So what did Florida State do? They went the legal route. They made a spectacle. They made a scene of things and said, all right, we'll go to court over it. We will go to court and we will spend millions of dollars going to court so that you will give us what we want. And if you don't, we'll leave the conference. Some folks on the FSU side that I've already spoken with seem to think that the litigation part of this could continue, but we'll see on that, right? We have very much always been transparent with telling you like, hey, we're hearing this, we expect this. And to be very frank with you, most of the people we've talked with are on the FSU side or the TV side. We're not speaking with people in Charlotte. We don't really get that perspective. We try to be pretty transparent on when we were hearing things. And again, we are hearing folks on the FSU side seem to think that things could continue. However, folks on the FSU side, let's be very honest with you. I'll own it. I'll wear it. Have been wrong a lot. And we've been wrong in turn at times because of that. And we've been right a lot too. There's no doubt about it. But I'm taking what we hear from those folks with a little bit of a grain of salt. Now, it is a slight win for Florida State and Clemson. There is increased revenue. There is the potential of an early exit. Obviously, it was mentioned that around that 2030 date is when the next round of TV contracts with the Big Ten and the SEC are set to take place. So there are some positives if you're a Florida State or a Clemson fan. If you're able to chop 5 or 6 years off of that grant of rights, that's hundreds of millions of dollars that you're saving. That's an earlier exit that you could accomplish. That is objectively good. If you're making more money over the next 5 or 6 years during that time that you are locked into the ACC, that is objectively good too. Is it as good as getting out of the conference tomorrow? No, of course not. It's not even close to as good as that could have been. However, instead of an all or nothing, we have a compromise. We have a settlement that appears to be coming. However, this is not all sunshine and roses. If you're a Seminole, a Tiger, a Tar Heel, a Hurricane, somebody that wants to get out of the conference, it's not all sunshine and roses. It could be pretty terrible if the ACC doesn't agree to that, if they don't agree to the 2030, 31 timeframe of letting teams out of the conference or reducing the penalties down to that point. The other part of this is the money aspect of this doesn't really satisfy the needs, in my opinion, of Florida State and Clemson. Look at 2025. You can see there that in 2025, there's still a pretty large gap. The SEC making $74.9 million and the ACC making less than $40 million. You math whizzes out there can do the quick math if you want. And then look all the way down to 2029. This projection has the SEC at up over $105 million and the ACC at just $55 million based on average payout estimates, based on the rate of the increases, what they're being paid out now. In fact, I'll even do you guys one better. Now, this graphic isn't as pretty because I created it, but here are the differences. Here's how much more a team will be making in the SEC. The Big Ten, similar numbers, but let's just look at the SEC and the ACC. In 2028, you're looking at a $50 million difference. In 2031, when they're talking about getting out of this, again, you're looking at a $46.9 million difference. So my question would be, for this, and I'll leave the graphic on the screen in case you want to screenshot it or you want to continue to reference it while we talk. The question would be, how much of the unequal revenue sharing is Florida State and Clemson really going to get? How much can the ACC make up that difference? Because Florida State and Clemson's argument, whether you agree with it, disagree, whatever, their argument is that we need to be closer to where our competitors are, where the teams at the top are, so that we can compete. And If Florida State and Clemson cannot make up enough of that gap, that $35 million gap this year, and then that $50 million gap in 2030, if they go on for 4, 5, 6 years, making an average of $42 million a year less than their peers, you're talking about almost $250 million. And that doesn't even count how much money the SEC is going to make from the playoff, when they likely have 4 auto bids coming up, and Florida State's ACC and Clemson's ACC and Miami's ACC is probably only getting 1, maybe 2 teams in. When we go to 14 teams, you realize when the Big Ten and the SEC get 8 in, you've got 6 left. 1 ACC, 1 Big 12, 1 group of 5, and then 3 spots left, right? 1 spot if you go to 14, but 3 spots if you go to 16. Well, you got to imagine that there's going to be 1 SEC team in one of those 3 spots. And so does that leave Florida State 1 spot? Does that leave the ACC, 1 spot to get in? Is it sustainable for them to operate at still a $30 to $50 million gap? No, that's why they need the unequal revenue sharing. But how much will that unequal revenue sharing really be? How much of a gap can they close? Even if Florida State made $20 million more than, say, a Wake Forest, that still puts them at a deficit of $30 million in 2030. Let's say you're able to cut it in half. Say Florida State's able to make $25 million more than Duke, $25 million more than Boston College. You're still $25 million behind the SEC and the Big Ten. Now, this is ultimately what Florida State wanted. Again, I talked about it. This is what Michael Alford was begging for. This is what he was asking for back in 2023, the early parts of that year, asking for unequal revenue sharing. And so ultimately, they are getting what they originally asked for. What Florida State fans, what Clemson fans want is to be out. I get that. They're getting what they asked for. So it is a small win. But is it sustainable? Is it enough for them to really compete at the highest level? When you think about the gap between the SEC and the Big Ten, I don't know. Now, it's a win to get out earlier. It's a win to get more money. But is it the ultimate win? No, I don't think so. Litigation, will it continue to ongo? Will they reach a settlement? I've been told that a settlement could come pretty quickly on this. I've been told by other people that it may continue on. It may not be dropped. It may not be completely extinguished. We'll see. As part of any settlement that they agree with the ACC, if they sign on to it, I would think that you've got to drop litigation pretty quickly. Now, some people have pointed out that Clemson's litigation was more so exploratory as to what the costs would be to leave. So maybe theirs could continue on. I'd be pretty surprised, though, if either lawsuit continued on once things were agreed to. It would probably be part of a settlement negotiation to drop existing lawsuits. If this is agreed to, I do think it's a win for Florida State and Clemson. I also think it's a win for the ACC. And like I said, what do we call that? A compromise, a settlement. Both sides settled on something by giving something else up. For the ACC, you have 5 or 6 years less of your most valuable brands. But for Florida State and Clemson, you're staying longer and still making less than the big boys than I'm sure you wanted to. There's very valid questions about money. There's valid questions about sustainability. There's valid questions about a lot of things. But if you're a Clemson fan and a Florida State fan, remove all the numbers out of it. Remove everything out of it. And if you're just being honest right now, it's hard to not feel like this is getting 8 yards on a really good play, but knowing that the down and distance was 3rd and 10 and that you still have to punt. That's probably how this feels right now. It kind of feels like you had a chance. You got it close. You fought back. And you did get some wins, right? You got a moral victory or 2, or maybe not even a moral victory, but like an actual victory. It feels like going undefeated in 2023 and then being told, hey, we're rewarding you with an Orange Bowl against Georgia, the most talented team in the country. To leave the football cliches behind, what about the other side? If this is still until 2036, if it's not reduced down to 2030, 31, I think Clemson and Florida State have a lot of questions that need to be asked about their leadership. I think they have a lot of questions that need to be asked about the expectation that whether they intended it or not, which I think Florida State certainly did. Clemson, maybe you could have a question about. If this is until 2036, even with the unequal revenue, I think questions need to be asked about the leadership. And I'm not necessarily mentioning A.D. Alford in that. I think these decisions are made pretty far over his head. But you think about the board of trustees, and you think about the president, you think about Drew Weatherford, Florida State quarterback, mentioning, do we want to play games or do we want to compete? And being locked into the 2036 season feels like playing games to me. It feels like they're not competing at that point. Now, that's me being a homer. That's me being a Florida State fan. But it feels like if they don't get out before 2036, they just had a year and a half of playing games. They just had 2 years of realizing that they're not going to compete. And what they did for a couple of years was play games. We'll see how it turns out. There will be more updates to this. We will find out the numbers. We will find out the monetary impact. We will find out if a settlement is reached, if lawsuits are dropped. So make sure you're subscribed as we continue to talk about this. I will recommend our friends over at the Big Mountain podcast. They did a phenomenal live show last night that you guys should go check out. I'm planning on having them on soon. They do a great job, both JY and Steve, in breaking a lot of this down. They talked about a lot of aspects of conference realignment last night again on their show. Go check them out if you haven't already. If you're a conference realignment junkie like I am, if you're a Florida State fan that just wants to get the hell out, go check them out. They do a great, great job. And we'll get them on soon to chat about some of this stuff now that we have new wrinkles and new information. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I'm sure we will certainly get some haters. I told you so's. I'm here for that. Listen, we've always tried to just tell you what people were telling us, what sources were lending to our ears, what the rumors were, what speculation was. And we're always going to bring you that content, whether you like it or not. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Again, we don't ask for much. No ad in this video. We're not trying to sell you anything or get you to click a link. If you do me the favor of subscribing, we would appreciate that. But we will talk to you soon. We will continue to cover this conference realignment here on College Football Addiction.